The night Francis Haley chose his date for his family's Christmas dinner, he didn't pick a socialite, a model, or the daughter of a business associate. He walked into the private art gallery his family owned and pointed at the curator organizing paintings in the back room. Helen Knudsen froze with a 19th century landscape in her hands, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Every breath caught in her throat, every thought scattered like snow in the wind. Francis Haley never asked twice, he never showed weakness, and he never made decisions without calculating every angle. The gallery was silent except for the distant hum of Christmas music playing softly through hidden speakers, and the sound of Francis's expensive Italian shoes echoing on the hardwood floors. It was nearly closing time, and Helen was finishing her last task of the evening, trying to stay unnoticed the way she always did. She preferred blending into the background, letting the art speak louder than she ever could. She liked being invisible, but tonight, invisibility was impossible. Francis stood in the doorway of the storage room, still wearing the charcoal suit and crisp white shirt from a meeting that had clearly run late. His dark blonde hair was perfectly styled, his strong jaw set with determination, and his piercing eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her hands tremble. A Patek Philippe watch gleamed on his wrist, worth more than she'd earn in 5 years. Behind him, Christmas garlands draped across the gallery entrance, gold and crimson ornaments catching the gallery lights, creating an almost surreal contrast between holiday warmth and the cold power radiating from the man before her. "Mr. Haley?" Helen whispered, because her voice simply wouldn't rise above that. She carefully placed the painting on the restoration table, afraid her shaking hands might damage it. He studied her, as if making a decision that could not be undone, his gaze sweeping from her paint-stained fingers to her worn cardigan to her face, analyzing, calculating. "You," he repeated, his voice low and certain, "you're coming with me to my family's Christmas dinner." Her throat tightened. She had been cataloging new acquisitions, her dark hair falling loose from its clip, her clothes practical and forgettable, hands smelling faintly of linseed oil and turpentine. She shouldn't even be having this conversation with Francis Haley, much less standing in a room alone with him. She set down her clipboard carefully, trying to steady herself. "I think you're mistaken, Mr. Haley," she managed. I'm just the curator. I work here. I don't..." Marcus, Francis's right-hand man and head of security, was standing just behind him in the doorway, arms crossed, eyebrows raised nearly to his hairline. Even he looked shocked, and Marcus had seen everything in his years working for the Haley family. Francis stepped fully into the storage room, closing the distance between them. The space suddenly felt impossibly small. "I am not mistaken." Helen swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Why me?" His gaze swept over her again, not in a predatory way, but in that same calculating manner, like she was a painting he was appraising, looking for the truth beneath the surface. She felt exposed, even though she still wore her shapeless cardigan and practical flats. "You don't want anything from me," he said slowly, his voice softer now, but no less certain. "You don't want my money, not my name, not my connections. Last week, you argued with Marcus for 20 minutes about whether a Caravaggio had been misattributed. You didn't even notice I was standing there." Helen's cheeks flushed. She remembered that argument. She'd been so passionate about the brushwork technique that she'd forgotten to be intimidated. "You see paintings, not price tags. You see history, not investments. And when you finally did notice me, you asked what I thought about the symbolism of light and darkness in Baroque art. No one has asked me what I think about anything in years." Helen's breath came shallow. She wanted to step back, but the restoration table was behind her. "Mr. Haley, I appreciate the compliment, I think, but your family's Christmas dinner is in 3 days. Surely there's someone more appropriate." "There isn't," he said flatly. "I need someone real, someone who won't perform for my family or play games with my cousins or try to impress my mother, someone who will just be honest." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. "Boss, are you sure about this? The family's going to have questions." Francis didn't look away from Helen. "Let them ask." Helen's mind raced. This was dangerous, not because of Francis, though he was one of the most feared men in the city, but because visibility was the last thing she needed. She'd been invisible for 6 months, carefully, deliberately invisible. If she went to a Haley family dinner, there would be photos, questions, scrutiny. And if the wrong person saw her face? "I can't," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Francis's eyes narrowed slightly. "Can't or won't?" I'm just not the kind of person who goes to these things. I wouldn't know how to act, what to say. Your family will see exactly what I see. Someone intelligent, someone genuine, someone who doesn't belong to my world, and that's exactly why I'm asking." Helen looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the tailored suit and the reputation, she saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. The kind that comes from being surrounded by people who only saw what you could give them, never who you actually are. "Please," he added, and the word sounded almost foreign in his mouth, like he didn't use it often. Helen's hands clenched at her sides. She should say no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to stay hidden, to keep her head down. But something in his eyes, that flash of vulnerability, made her hesitate. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "this is just one dinner, one night, and then we go back to normal. You're the owner's family, and I'm just the curator." Something flickered across Francis's face. Disappointment, maybe, or determination. "If that's what you want." It wasn't what she wanted. That was the terrifying part. "One dinner," she repeated, trying to convince herself. Francis nodded once, decisively. "Marcus will pick you up at 6 on Christmas Eve. Wear something—" He paused, his gaze dropping to her worn cardigan and back up. "Wear something that makes you feel powerful." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the storage room, Marcus following behind him. At the doorway, Francis paused and looked back. "Helen," he used her first name for the first time. "Thank you." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the storage room with a 19th century landscape, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air, and the terrifying certainty that she had just made a decision that would change everything. She waited until she heard the gallery door close before her legs gave out. She sank onto the restoration stool, hands shaking violently now. Outside the window, snow began to fall over the city, Christmas lights twinkling in the early evening darkness. Helen pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and opened the news app, searching for one name, Vincent Crane. There he was, a photo from just yesterday at a charity gala in the city, smiling for cameras, looking every bit the legitimate businessman and philanthropist. No one would ever guess what she'd seen him do 18 months ago. No one would ever believe her. She closed the app quickly, as if he might somehow sense her looking. 3 days. She had 3 days before she walked into one of the most visible events in the city's social calendar. 3 days before she stood beside Francis Haley in front of people who would photograph her, scrutinize her, ask questions about her past. 3 days before Vincent Crane might see her face and realize the witness who'd escaped wasn't hiding across the country anymore. She was right here, in his city, in his world. Helen stood slowly, her decision made. She'd go to the dinner because refusing Francis Haley would draw more attention than agreeing. She'd smile, survive one night, and then disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But as she locked up the gallery and stepped out into the snowy December night, one thought haunted her with each step. What if one night was all it took for her carefully constructed invisibility to shatter completely? What happens when Helen walks into the Haley family Christmas dinner on Francis's arm? Will her past catch up with her before she can escape? And what will Francis discover when he learns the truth about the woman he's chosen? If you want to find out how this dangerous Christmas romance unfolds, subscribe now, because the next twist reveals exactly what Francis's family thinks of his shocking choice, and the transformation that will change Helen's life forever. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the Mafia boss's family sees who he brought home for Christmas. hit that subscribe button because this is just the beginning of a story about power, protection, and the most dangerous gift of all, being truly seen by someone who could either save you or destroy you. Helen barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Francis standing in the gallery doorway, his expression impossible to read, his voice certain when he said her name. She'd replayed the conversation 100 times, searching for the moment she could have said no more forcefully, the words that would have made him choose someone else. But the truth was, she hadn't wanted to say no, and that terrified her more than anything. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones. She arrived at the gallery early, hoping to lose herself in work, but Marcus was already waiting outside. He handed her an envelope without comment. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "My driver will collect you tonight at 7. We need to discuss details. F.H." "He doesn't take no for an answer, does he?" Helen murmured. "Never has." That evening, a black Mercedes pulled up to her apartment building. Helen had changed 3 times, finally settling on a simple navy dress that wouldn't draw attention. The driver opened her door without a word, and 20 minutes later, she found herself in Francis's penthouse overlooking the city. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand, still wearing his suit from the day. When he turned, something in his expression softened. "You came." "Did I have a choice?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Yes," he said simply. "You always have a choice with me." Helen set her bag down, trying to steady her nerves. "Then why does this feel like I'm being swept into something I don't understand?" Francis crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Because you are, but not for the reasons you think." He gestured to the sofa. "Sit, please." She did, and he sat across from her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. For a man who commanded fear across the city, he looked almost vulnerable. "My family's Christmas dinner isn't just a meal. It's theater. Everyone performs, everyone has an angle. My cousins compete for my father's approval. Business associates try to secure deals. Women position themselves strategically." He paused. "I'm exhausted by all of it." "And you think I'm different because I work in your gallery?" "I think you're different because when I asked your opinion on that Caravaggio, you told me I was wrong about the artist's intention. To my face, without hesitation." His eyes held hers. "Do you know how rare that is?" Helen's throat tightened. "I probably shouldn't have." "You should have. You did, and then you explained why, with so much passion. I actually learned something." He leaned back. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. You told me what you actually thought. That's why I want you there." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "Francis, I appreciate that, but you don't know me, not really." "Then let me." He stood, walking back to the window. 3 days, 1 dinner, and maybe I get 1 evening where someone sees me as more than a name or a reputation. Helen watched him, backlit by the city lights, and saw the loneliness she glimpsed before. She should tell him everything, about Vincent, about why visibility could kill her, about the fake passport hidden in her apartment, but the words stuck in her throat. "What if I disappoint you?" she asked instead. He turned, and for the first time she saw him smile, small but genuine. "Impossible." Helen left the penthouse an hour later with a promise to be ready Christmas Eve and a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The driver dropped her at her apartment building, and she climbed 4 flights of stairs to her tiny studio, hands shaking as she unlocked the door. The space was barely furnished: a bed, a small table, a kitchenette, everything temporary, everything ready to abandon at a moment's notice. She went to her closet and pushed aside the few clothes she owned, reaching for the shoebox in the back. Inside, a fake passport with a different name, $3,000 in cash, a burner phone, and a folded newspaper clipping from 18 months ago. She didn't need to unfold it. She'd memorized every word. Federal witness goes missing from protection program. Authorities fear foul play. Helen's hands trembled as she put everything back. She pulled out her laptop and opened a news site, typing Vincent Crane's name into the search bar. His face filled the screen immediately. The headline read, "Arms dealer turned philanthropist announces major investment in city development." There he was at a press conference yesterday, shaking hands with the mayor, smiling that charming smile that hid everything underneath. The article praised his business acumen, his charitable contributions, his commitment to the community. No mention of the man he'd ordered killed in that warehouse. No mention of the witness who'd seen it all and barely escaped with her life. Helen's vision blurred. Her breath came in short gasps. She closed the laptop quickly, pressing her palms against her eyes. Vincent was here, in her city, expanding his empire while she hid in a 400-square-foot apartment, afraid of her own shadow. And in 3 days, she would walk into the most visible event of the season on the arm of a man whose name carried its own dangerous weight. She should run, pack the shoebox, take the emergency cash, disappear before anyone connected her face to her past. But something stopped her. Francis's voice saying, "You always have a choice with me." The genuine smile when he said, "Impossible." For 18 months, she'd been invisible, terrified, alone. And now someone was asking her to be seen, really seen. Helen stood slowly, walking to her window. Snow was falling heavier now, covering the city in white. Somewhere out there, Vincent Crane was building his empire. Somewhere closer, Frances Haley was preparing for a Christmas dinner that would change everything. And here she was, caught between the past that hunted her and the future that terrified her for entirely different reasons. She touched the cold glass, watching her breath fog the window. 3 days. Helen spent Christmas Eve morning doing what she'd done for the past 3 nights, researching. Her laptop screen glowed with articles about the Haley family's annual Christmas dinner, a tradition spanning 3 generations. Photos showed elegant ballrooms, designer gowns, and faces she recognized from Forbes lists and political circles. Every image reminded her how completely she didn't belong. At exactly noon, Marcus knocked on her apartment door. He stood in the hallway looking uncomfortable, like the peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights offended him personally. "Time to go," he said simply. The drive took them to an exclusive boutique in a neighborhood where Helen usually avoided even walking. Marcus led her inside, where a woman named Isabel waited with a knowing smile. "Mr. Haley called personally," Isabel said, already assessing Helen with a professional eye. "He said to make you feel like yourself, just elevated. So let's begin." The next 3 hours blurred together. Isabel's team moved around Helen like artists approaching a canvas, washing, styling, perfecting. Her dark hair, usually pulled back carelessly, was transformed into soft waves that fell past her shoulders. Makeup enhanced rather than masked, bringing out the green in her eyes she'd always tried to hide. When they finally brought out the dress, Helen's breath caught. Crimson velvet, elegant and timeless, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that moved like water. It was the kind of dress that demanded to be noticed. "I can't wear this," Helen whispered. "You can," Isabel said firmly, "and you will." When Helen finally saw herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked confident. She looked like she belonged in Francis's world. The realization made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Marcus waited in the boutique's sitting area, scrolling through his phone. When Helen emerged, he looked up and froze mid-motion. For several seconds, he just stared. "Boss is going to lose his mind," he muttered finally, something like approval in his voice. They drove to Francis's penthouse as afternoon faded into evening. Helen watched the city transform with Christmas lights, every building draped in gold and silver, every window glowing with warmth. It should have been beautiful. Instead, each light felt like a spotlight pointing directly at her. Francis was waiting in his living room, adjusting his cufflinks. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look even more formidable than usual. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. Whatever he'd been about to say died on his lips. He crossed the room slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached her, he lifted one hand and touched her bare shoulder, just his fingertips against her skin, gentle and reverent. "Perfect," he said quietly. Helen's breath caught. The word wasn't about the dress or the makeup, it was about her, and the way he looked at her made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she actually was. "We should go," Marcus said from the doorway, breaking the moment. "The family's expecting you at 7. The drive to the Haley estate took them through neighborhoods where Christmas decorations grew more elaborate with each mile. Helen sat beside Francis in the back of the Mercedes, hyper aware of how close he was, how his presence seemed to fill the entire space. She couldn't stop checking the side mirror. Every car behind them made her pulse spike. Every shadow between streetlights looked like a threat. "Helen?" Francis's voice was quiet but commanding. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly. "What are you afraid of?" The question was so direct it knocked the air from her lungs. She wanted to lie, to deflect, and say something about meeting his family or feeling out of place, but the way he watched her, patient, genuinely concerned, made dishonesty feel impossible. "Everything," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "You're with me tonight. That means you're safe. Whatever you're afraid of, it goes through me first." Helen's throat constricted. He had no idea what he was promising, no idea that the thing she feared most wasn't his family's judgment or social embarrassment. It was a man who'd already proven he'd kill to keep his secrets buried. But Francis held her hand like he meant every word, and for the first time in 18 months, Helen let herself believe that maybe someone actually could protect her, even if that belief might get them both killed. The estate gates appeared ahead, wrought iron and decorated with thousands of white lights. Beyond them, the Haley mansion glowed like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and welcoming and absolutely terrifying. Francis squeezed her hand once more. "Ready?" Helen nodded, even though the answer was no, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Because the truth was, she'd stopped running the moment he touched her shoulder and called her perfect. She just hoped it wasn't too late to start again. The Haley estate was a masterpiece of old money and Christmas excess. A massive tree dominated the entrance hall, draped in gold ornaments and crystal. Garlands wound up the dual staircases, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. But Helen barely noticed the decorations. She was too focused on the dozens of faces turning toward them as Francis guided her inside, his hand steady at the small of her back. The conversation died instantly. Then the whispers started. "Who is that?" a woman in emerald silk murmured to her companion. "I've never seen her before," someone else answered. "Is she from the Philadelphia branch?" Francis's mother appeared first, gliding across the marble floor in champagne satin. Catherine Haley was elegant, controlled, and clearly displeased. Her smile never reached her eyes as she assessed Helen from head to toe. "Francis," she said coolly, "you didn't mention you were bringing a guest." "This is Helen Knudsen," Francis replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Helen, my mother, Catherine." Helen extended her hand. "Mrs. Haley, thank you for having me." Catherine's handshake was brief and formal. "How unexpected." She turned to her son. "Perhaps we should speak privately." "No need," Francis said. "Shall we join the others?" The great room was filled with Haley family members and their carefully vetted guests. Helen recognized faces from her research. Francis's father, Thomas, a silver-haired man who radiated quiet authority. His younger brother, James, and James's wife, Victoria, who looked at Helen like she'd tracked mud on an expensive carpet. Victoria was the first to strike. She appeared at Helen's side with a glass of champagne and a surgical smile. "So, Helen, how exactly do you know Francis? I don't believe I've seen you at any family events before." "I work at the gallery," Helen said simply. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "The gallery? How quaint. So your staff." Francis materialized beside Helen before she could respond. "She's the curator," he said, voice edged with warning. "One of the finest art historians in the sea." "Of course," Victoria said sweetly, backing away with her smile still intact. "How lovely." The evening proceeded like walking through a minefield. Every conversation felt like an interrogation. Where did she go to school? Who was her family? How long had she known Francis? Helen answered carefully, revealing just enough to be polite while hiding everything that mattered. Francis never left her side. When his cousin asked pointed questions about her background, Francis redirected. When an older associate got too close, Francis physically positioned himself between them. His family noticed, confusion and concern written across their faces. Dinner was served in a ballroom that could have housed 50 people comfortably. Helen found herself seated between Francis and his uncle Edmund, a retired professor who'd spent the cocktail hour looking bored by everything. "Francis tells me you studied at the Institute," Edmund said, cutting into his beef Wellington without looking at her. "I did. Art history with a focus on Baroque period." And what do you make of the contemporary arguments about Caravaggio's religious sincerity?" Helen set down her fork, feeling the table's attention shift toward them. This was a test, and they both knew it. "I think the question itself is reductive. Caravaggio's faith wasn't separate from his darkness, it was enhanced by it. The violence in his life gave weight to his understanding of grace. You can't have redemption without knowing what you need to be redeemed from." Edmund's fork paused mid-air. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at her. "Go on." His use of tenebrism wasn't just technique, it was theology. The light doesn't exist without the darkness. They define each other. Helen's voice grew stronger, forgetting for a moment where she was. When critics question his sincerity, they're missing the point entirely. His paintings are confessions. Silence fell across their section of the table. Then Edmund smiled, genuine and surprised. "Finally," he said, "someone in this family who can think." He raised his glass to her. "You're wasted on these Philistines, my dear." Helen felt Francis's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. When she glanced at him, something in his expression made her heart stutter. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. But then she looked past him, scanning the room out of habit, and her blood turned to ice. A man stood near the service entrance, dressed like the other security personnel, but watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with protection. He wasn't looking at the room. He was looking at her. Only her. Helen recognized the tilt of his head, the way he held himself. She'd seen him before, 18 months ago, standing by Vincent Crane in that warehouse. The room spun. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand. Francis noticed immediately. "Helen, what's wrong?" She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, because Vincent's man was here, in this room, which meant Vincent knew exactly where she was, and the careful invisibility she'd maintained for 6 months had just shattered completely. Francis didn't ask permission. The moment he saw Helen's face drain of color, he stood and pulled her chair back, his hand firm on her arm. "Excuse us," he said to the table, his tone brooking no argument. Catherine started to protest, but Francis was already guiding Helen away from the ballroom, through a side door, down a hallway lined with family portraits. Helen's legs barely worked. She could feel Vincent's men's eyes following them until the door closed. Francis led her into a private study. Leather chairs, built-in bookshelves, a fireplace crackling with warmth that did nothing to stop her shaking. He locked the door behind them and turned to face her. his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Talk," he said. "Now." Helen wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together. "I can't. Someone in my home just terrified you." Francis crossed to her in 2 strides. "Either you tell me what's happening, or I go back out there and make him tell me. Your choice." The hardness in his voice cracked something inside her. Helen's knees gave out, and she sank into one of the leather chairs, her breath coming in short gasps. "His name is Vincent Crane," she whispered. Francis went very still. "The arms dealer? He's here. One of his men is here, watching me." Helen pressed her hands over her face. "I'm so sorry. I should never have come. I should never have—" "Why is Vincent Crane looking for you?" Francis's voice was quieter now, but no less intense. The truth clawed its way up Helen's throat, 18 months of silence finally breaking. "Because I saw him kill someone. 18 months ago, I worked as an administrative assistant for what I thought was a legitimate import company. One night, I stayed late to finish paperwork and heard voices in the warehouse below my office. I looked through the window and saw Vincent with 2 other men. They had someone on his knees." Her voice cracked. Francis knelt in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Keep going," he said. "Vincent shot him, just pulled out a gun and shot him in the head. I ran, called the police from a payphone 3 blocks away. The FBI put me in witness protection within 48 hours. Helen's whole body trembled. "But 6 months ago, someone leaked my location. I woke up to federal marshals pounding on my door at 3 in the morning. They barely got me out before Vincent's people arrived." "Where did they take you?" "A safe house in Oregon. But I knew someone in the program was compromised. Someone was feeding Vincent information." She looked at Francis, tears streaming down her face. "So I ran, took the emergency cash, a fake ID they'd given me, and disappeared. I've been moving every few months, staying invisible, until I ended up here, working at your gallery where nobody looks at the staff." Francis's expression was unreadable, his mind clearly working through everything she'd said. "You've been running alone for 6 months." "Yes." "And now he knows exactly where you are?" "Yes." Helen's voice broke completely. "I'm so sorry, Francis. I never meant to bring this to your family. I should go, right now, before—" "You're not going anywhere." The words came out like steel. Helen blinked through her tears. "You don't understand. Vincent Crane doesn't just kill witnesses. He destroys everything around them first. Everyone who helped me. Everyone who—" "You think I can't protect you from an arms dealer?" Francis stood, and there was something dangerous in his posture now, something that reminded her exactly who he was. "He has people everywhere," Helen whispered. "He's already here, in your home." "This is my world, Helen. My city, my territory." Francis pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "Vincent Crane operates in the shadows because that's where men like him survive, but I own those shadows." "Francis, you can't just—" He looked at her, and his eyes were harder than she'd ever seen them. "I asked you to come here tonight because you were the first person who saw me as human. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my life? How valuable?" Helen shook her head, unable to speak. "You're in my world now," Francis continued, his voice dropping lower. "And in my world, I don't let anyone touch what's mine. Do you understand me?" The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, it made something in her chest crack open. 18 months of fear and isolation, meeting the first real promise of protection she'd had. "He'll come for me," she whispered. "Let him." Francis extended his hand to her. "But he'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, Helen, nobody gets through me." She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. He didn't let go, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "We need to secure you tonight," he said. "My family will have questions, but that comes second. Your safety comes first." Helen nodded, still trembling. "What are you going to do?" Francis's jaw set with determination. "What I should have done the moment I decided you mattered." He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "I'm going to make sure Vincent Crane understands that touching you means declaring war on me. And wars in my city have only one outcome." "What outcome?" Helen breathed. His eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering. "I win." Within minutes of leaving the study, Francis had transformed from dinner host to something far more dangerous. He pulled Marcus aside in the hallway, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences. Marcus's expression darkened with each word. Then he nodded once and disappeared. Helen stood frozen as the Christmas dinner descended into controlled chaos. Security personnel appeared from nowhere, blocking exits. Francis's father emerged from the ballroom, his face thunderous. "What the hell is going on?" Thomas demanded. "Security breach," Francis said flatly. "No one leaves until we verify every person in this house." Catherine appeared behind her husband, her earlier coldness replaced with sharp concern. "Francis, you're frightening our guests. What kind of breach?" But Francis was already moving past them, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory focus. Helen followed, her heart hammering, as he strode toward the service entrance where Vincent's man had been standing. The man was gone. Francis's jaw clenched. He spoke into his phone, voice low and lethal. "Find him. I want him alive." 10 minutes later, Marcus returned with 2 guards dragging a man between them. Helen's stomach dropped. It was him, Vincent's operative, his expensive suit now disheveled, a cut above his eyebrow bleeding slightly. Francis took him to the wine cellar. Helen waited upstairs, listening to the muffled sounds through the floor, trying not to imagine what was happening. When Francis emerged 20 minutes later, his knuckles were bruised and his expression was granite. "He's gone," Francis said to Marcus. "Get him out of my house." "What did he tell you?" Helen asked, her voice barely audible. Francis guided her away from listening ears. "Vincent knows you're here. He's been watching the gallery for weeks. Tonight was reconnaissance." His eyes met hers. "He's planning to extract you within 48 hours. Helen's legs weakened. "Then I need to disappear. Tonight. I can't let him." "You're not disappearing." Francis's grip on her arm tightened. "You're staying exactly where I can protect you." A throat cleared behind them. Thomas stood with Catherine and several other family members, all wearing expressions ranging from confusion to outright anger. "Francis," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "my office, now." Helen moved to step back, but Francis kept her beside him. "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Helen." "That's exactly the problem." Thomas's eyes flicked to her, cold and assessing. "You've brought danger into our home for a woman none of us know. I want answers." "She's under my protection," Francis said simply. "Why?" Victoria stepped forward, arms crossed. "She's nobody, Francis. No family, no connections, no—" "Enough." Francis's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Helen is my guest, and questioning my decisions isn't your place." "It is when you're risking all of us," Thomas countered. "Who is threatening her? What have you dragged us into?" Helen felt the weight of every eye on her. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to run, to do anything except stand here while Francis's family blamed him for her presence. "I should go," she whispered. "You're not going anywhere," Francis repeated, not looking away from his father. Thomas's expression hardened. "We need to discuss this, privately." Francis finally released Helen's arm, but not before squeezing gently. "Stay with Marcus. I'll handle this." Helen found herself escorted to a guest room in what Marcus called the secure wing. 2 guards stood outside her door. Inside, the room was beautiful. cream and gold with a four-poster bed and windows overlooking the estate gardens, now covered in snow and twinkling with thousands of Christmas lights. The beauty felt obscene against her terror. She sank onto the bed, still wearing the crimson dress, and listened to raised voices echoing from somewhere below. Francis's voice, his father's, others joining in. They couldn't make out words, but the anger was unmistakable. Then Francis's voice rose above the others, clear and furious. "She's not a stranger. She's the first honest person I've met in years, so if you're asking me to choose between family politics and doing what's right, I'm choosing her." Silence followed his declaration. Helen pressed her hands over her mouth, something breaking open in her chest. He was defending her, truly defending her, against his own family, against logic, against everything. An hour later, Francis appeared at her door. His tie was gone, shirt partially unbuttoned, exhaustion written across his face. Marcus stood behind him. Vincent sent a message, Francis holding up a piece of expensive Christmas stationery. The words were handwritten in elegant script. "Return what doesn't belong to you." "He's treating this like a negotiation," Marcus said grimly. "But Vincent Crane doesn't negotiate. He eliminates problems." Francis crumpled the note. "Then he's about to learn that I eliminate threats." Helen stood, wrapping her arms around her. "Francis, my family is right. I'm not worth—" "Don't." He crossed to her in 3 strides. "Don't finish that sentence." "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I know you argued with me about art because you cared about truth, not about impressing me. I know you've survived 18 months of hell alone. I know you're terrified right now, but you're still standing here." His thumb brushed her cheek. "That's all I need to know." Marcus cleared his throat. "Boss, we need a plan." Francis stepped back, but his eyes never left Helen's face. "You stay here tonight, guards on rotation. Tomorrow we move you somewhere more secure." "Where?" Helen asked. "My penthouse. It's a fortress." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Helen, I don't know what this is between us, but I know I can't walk away, and I know I won't let Vincent take you." After he left, Helen stood at the window watching the Christmas lights blur through her tears. Outside, beauty. Inside, protection. But everywhere, the shadow of Vincent Crane drawing closer with every passing hour. She'd spent 18 months running, but standing in Francis Haley's guest room, guards outside her door, his declaration still echoing in her ears, Helen realized something had changed. She was done running. Now she just had to survive what came next. The Grand Imperial Hotel was hosting its annual Christmas charity gala, which made it the perfect neutral ground. Too public for violence, too prestigious for scandal. Francis arrived with Marcus and 2 other men, all armed beneath their tailored suits. Vincent Crane was waiting in a private salon off the main ballroom, surrounded by the soft glow of Christmas lights and the distant sound of carolers. He looked exactly like his photographs, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that belonged on magazine covers. Nothing about him suggested he was a man who ordered executions. "Francis Haley," Vincent said warmly, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." Francis ignored the hand. "You have 60 seconds to say what you came to say." Vincent's smile never faltered. He gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. "Please, let's be civilized. It's Christmas, after all." They sat facing each other like chess players. Marcus stood behind Francis, hand inside his jacket. Vincent's own security lingered near the door, 2 men who looked military-trained and utterly emotionless. "You have something that belongs to me," Vincent began, his tone conversational. "I'd like her back." "Helen Knudsen doesn't belong to anyone," Francis said flatly. "Ah, but she does owe me something. A debt, you might say. Vincent leaned back, crossing his legs casually. She witnessed a private business matter 18 months ago. Very unfortunate timing on her part. Since then, she's been quite difficult to locate. Impressive, really, for an art curator. She's under my protection now. That's all you need to know. Vincent's smile thinned slightly. Francis, let's discuss this rationally. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous arrangement. You hand over Miss Knudsen, and in return, I stay completely out of your business operations in the city. No territorial disputes, no competition for the same contracts, no interference whatsoever. I don't make deals with men who hunt women. No? Perhaps this will change your mind. I've done some research on the Haley family's legitimate businesses, your real estate developments, your construction contracts, your shipping operations. All very impressive, all very vulnerable to the right kind of scrutiny. He slid the folder across the coffee table. Francis didn't touch it. Inside, you'll find documentation that could interest several federal agencies. Nothing that would destroy you, of course, but enough to freeze assets, trigger investigations, tie up your operations for years. Your family's reputation would suffer. Your mother's charitable foundation would face questions. Very messy. Francis's expression remained stone. You're threatening my family? I'm offering you a choice. Vincent's eyes hardened, the charm finally cracking. She's just a girl who saw something unfortunate. Why die for her? Why drag your entire family into a war over a witness? The silence stretched between them, tension coiling like a wire about to snap. Outside, Christmas music played. Inside, two men who built empires on violence measured each other. She's under my protection now. That's all you need to know. Vincent laughed, genuinely amused. You'd start a war over a witness? A woman you barely know? Francis leaned forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that made even Vincent's security shift uncomfortably. I'd end one over her. The room went cold. Vincent's smile disappeared completely. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. I see. How disappointing. I had hoped we could resolve this like civilized men. We're not civilized. We're predators, and you just made the mistake of hunting in my territory. Vincent collected his folder, his movements still controlled but lacking the earlier ease. You're making a fatal error, Francis. I have resources you can't imagine, connections that span continents. You think your little empire in this city can stand against what I've built? I think you've gotten comfortable operating in the shadows, but you've never faced someone willing to drag everything into the light. Keep pushing and I'll make sure every federal agency, every journalist, every one of your competitors knows exactly what you are. Vincent's jaw tightened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Helen Knudsen stays with me, and if I see any of your people within a mile of her, if I hear you've even spoken her name, I will personally ensure you spend what's left of your life in a federal prison. Do we understand each other? Vincent straightened his cufflinks, his mask of civility barely holding. You're in love with her. How utterly foolish. How I feel is irrelevant. What matters is that she's mine to protect, and I protect what's mine. Vincent moved toward the door, his security flanking him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back, his expression cold as winter. Merry Christmas, Francis, he said softly. Enjoy it. It might be your last. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot. Marcus exhaled slowly. Boss, he's not backing down. Neither am I, Francis said, staring at the closed door. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. Because Vincent was right about one thing, Francis had just declared war, and wars always had casualties. The call came at 3 a.m. Helen was lying awake in Francis's guest room at the estate. staring at the ceiling, when she heard footsteps running past her door. Raised voices, then Francis's voice, cold and terrible. "Where?" She found him in the hallway, still dressed from the meeting with Vincent, his face ashen. Marcus stood beside him, phone pressed to his ear, looking more shaken than Helen had ever seen him. "What happened?" Helen asked. Francis turned to her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. "David Chen, one of my senior men. They found him in his car an hour ago." "Found him?" "Dead." Marcus ended his call. Single gunshot to the head. Professional. Clean. Helen's stomach dropped. "Vincent." "His signature," Francis confirmed. "But that's not the worst of it." He looked at Marcus. "Tell her." Marcus's jaw tightened. David was one of 5 people who knew Helen's exact location, which means Vincent has someone inside our organization. The words hung in the air like poison. Helen felt the room spin. Someone's been feeding him information this whole time? "For weeks, probably longer," Francis said. His hands clenched into fists. "Which means nowhere in my organization is safe. Not the estate, not the offices, nowhere." "So what do we do?" Helen whispered. Francis's eyes met hers with absolute certainty. "We go to the only place I control completely, my penthouse. Just you, me, and Marcus. No one else knows the security codes. No one else has access." An hour later, Helen found herself in Francis's private elevator, rising 30 floors above the city. The penthouse was exactly what she expected. Modern, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Christmas-lit skyline. But it also felt different from his family estate. More personal. More him. "Guest room is down that hall," Francis said, carrying her hastily packed bag. "Bathroom's attached. You need anything? I'm right across." "Francis, get some sleep," he said, his voice gentler now. "We'll figure out our next move in the morning." But Helen couldn't sleep. At 4 a.m., she gave up and wandered to the living room, drawn to the massive windows. The city stretched out below, every building decorated for Christmas, lights twinkling like stars brought to earth, beautiful and indifferent to the danger closing in around them. "Can't sleep either?" She turned to find Francis standing in the doorway, barefoot, wearing only dress pants and an unbuttoned shirt. In the dim light, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "I keep thinking about David Chen," Helen said quietly. "He died because of me. He died because Vincent Crane is a monster." Francis crossed to stand beside her at the window. "Don't take his evil onto yourself." They stood in silence, watching the city breathe. Helen could feel the warmth radiating from Francis's body, could smell his cologne mixing with something uniquely him. "I've built an empire," Francis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Taken territories, crushed enemies, accumulated more money and power than most people dream of." He turned to look at her. "But I've never had anything I was afraid to lose, until now." Helen's breath caught. "Francis." "You terrify me, Helen." Francis stepped closer, his hand lifting to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Not because of Vincent or the danger, because you make me feel something other than control and strategy. You make me feel human again." "I don't know if that's good or bad," she whispered. "Neither do I." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But I know I can't let you go." They were inches apart. Helen could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could feel his breath against her skin. Her heart hammered so hard, she thought he must hear it. Francis's hand slid to cup her jaw, tilting her face up toward his. "Helen." "Boss." Marcus's voice shattered the moment. Marcus appeared in the living room, tablet in hand, expression grim. "We've got a problem." Francis dropped his hand but didn't step away. "What now?" Marcus held up the tablet. An email, sender unknown, with a single line of text. "I know what she testified in closed session. I know what you're willing to sacrifice. Neither will save her. Merry Christmas Eve. VC." Helen's knees weakened. "How does he know what I testified? Those records were sealed." "He has someone in the federal prosecutor's office," Francis said, his voice deadly quiet. This goes higher than we thought." Marcus set down the tablet. Vincent's not just coming for Helen, he's coming for everyone protecting her. He's going to systematically destroy anyone who stands between him and her. Helen backed away from both of them, shaking her head. "Then I need to turn myself in, go back to the marshals, or—" "No." Francis caught her arm. "That's exactly what he wants. You running, isolated, vulnerable. But people are dying because of me. People are dying because Vincent Crane is a monster." Francis's grip tightened. "Listen to me. This stopped being just your war the moment he threatened you in my city. It's ours now. Mine and yours. Do you understand?" Helen looked between him and Marcus, seeing the determination in both their faces. "You can't fight the entire federal system and an international arms dealer." "Watch me," Francis said. Marcus nodded. "We've got resources Vincent doesn't know about, connections he hasn't mapped. We can beat him." "But—" Francis pulled her closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "I told you once that I protect what's mine. I meant it, Helen. All of it. And I'm done playing defense." "What does that mean?" she whispered. His eyes burned with something fierce and protective in its intensity. "It means tomorrow we stop hiding. Tomorrow we go on offense, and we show Vincent Crane exactly what happens when he threatens someone under my protection." Outside the windows, the first light of Christmas Eve began to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful and terrible and promising violence. Christmas Eve morning, Francis's penthouse transformed into a war room. Phones rang constantly. Men arrived and left with files, weapons, encrypted communications. Helen watched from the periphery as Francis orchestrated something massive, his voice sharp and commanding, every move calculated. "It's done," Marcus said, finally closing his laptop. "Every piece is in place." Francis nodded, then turned to Helen. "You stay here. Marcus will have a security team." "No." Helen stepped forward. "I won't hide while you fight for me." "Helen, this isn't negotiable." "Yes, it is." She moved closer, meeting his eyes with a determination that surprised even herself. "I've been running and hiding for 18 months. I'm done. If you're walking into danger because of me, then I'm walking in with you." Francis's jaw tightened. "If you come, you stay behind me. Always. You don't speak, you don't engage, you follow my lead exactly." "I will." "I'm serious, Helen. One wrong move and—" "I'm not your weakness, Francis." She reached up, touching his face. "I'm your reason. There's a difference." Something in his expression cracked. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "If anything happens to you, then make sure nothing does." 2 hours later, they arrived at the Grand Imperial Hotel again, but tonight it was transformed for Christmas Eve midnight mass. Candles everywhere, a choir rehearsing in the chapel, hundreds of poinsettias lining the hallways, sacred and beautiful, and about to become a battlefield. Vincent was waiting in the same private salon, but this time he'd brought 6 men, all armed, all positioned strategically. He smiled when Francis and Helen entered with Marcus and 2 guards. "Bringing the witness to me," Vincent said pleasantly. "How considerate." "She's not going anywhere with you," Francis replied, positioning himself between Vincent and Helen. Vincent's smile hardened. He pulled out a small device and pressed play. Helen's voice filled the room, her testimony from the federal safe house, describing the murder in explicit detail, naming Vincent, providing dates and locations. "Federal evidence," Vincent said when the recording ended, "which I obtained from a very helpful prosecutor. Now, here's what's going to happen. Helen walks out with me tonight voluntarily, or I make a single phone call, and the men I have positioned at your family's estate start executing hostages, starting with your mother." Helen felt ice flood her veins. Francis didn't move. "You're bluffing," Marcus said. Vincent held up his phone, showing a live video feed. The Haley estate dining room, where family members were gathering for Christmas Eve dinner, completely unaware of the armed men positioned among the catering staff. "Am I?" Vincent asked. "So, Francis, the woman or your family? You have 60 seconds to decide." The room held its breath. Helen started to step forward to surrender, but Francis's arm shot out, blocking her. "I have a counter-offer," Francis said calmly. He nodded to Marcus, who opened his laptop and turned it to face Vincent. The screen showed documents, hundreds of pages of financial records, shipping manifests, communications, photographs. "That's every illegal arms deal you've made in the last decade. Every shell corporation, every offshore account, every government official you've bribed. As of 10 minutes ago, copies were delivered to Interpol, the FBI, the CIA, and, my personal favorite, 3 of your largest competitors who would love to know exactly how you've been undercutting them." Vincent's face went white. "You have 2 choices," Francis continued, his voice cold as winter. "You leave the country tonight and never return, or you die here on Christmas Eve, either by law enforcement or by your own business partners when they realize you're compromised. Your empire is over, Vincent. The only question is whether you walk away or get carried out." Vincent's men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Their loyalty was bought, not earned, and Francis had just made it clear their employer was finished. "You're insane," Vincent breathed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The enemies you've made?" "I know exactly what I've done." Francis took Helen's hand, pulling her forward to stand beside him. "I chose her over everything, and I'd do it again." Vincent stared at them both, disbelief and rage warring across his face. "You gave up everything rational for sentiment. You're weak now, Francis, vulnerable." Francis held Helen's hand tighter. "No, for the first time in my life, I'm human." The silence stretched. Then Vincent's phone buzzed, his men at the estate receiving new orders. His entire operation was collapsing in real time. "Stand down," Vincent said finally to his guards. "It's over." He straightened his jacket with shaking hands, his mask of sophistication shattered completely. "You underestimated me. You underestimated what I'd do for her. That was your mistake." Vincent walked toward the door with his men following. At the threshold, he looked back at Helen one last time. "You were just a witness. You could have lived quietly. Instead, you destroyed everything." "No," Helen said, finding her voice. "You destroyed everything the moment you pulled that trigger 18 months ago. I just made sure the world knew the truth." Vincent's expression twisted with hatred. Then he was gone, disappearing into the Christmas Eve crowds, exile his only option. The moment the door closed, Helen's legs gave out. Francis caught her, pulling her against him as 18 months of terror finally released. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe, I promise." Marcus cleared his throat. "We should go, make sure the estate is secure." But Francis didn't move. He held Helen like she was the only thing keeping him grounded, and maybe she was. Outside, church bells began to ring, announcing midnight mass. Christmas had arrived, and for the first time in 18 months, Helen wasn't running towards danger or away from it. She was exactly where she belonged. They returned to Francis's penthouse as dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Snow had begun to fall during the night, covering everything in pristine white. Christmas morning had arrived, quiet and peaceful, as if the world had forgotten the violence that almost happened just hours before. Helen stood by the windows, still wearing the crimson dress, now wrinkled and exhausted. Francis was on the phone with his father, confirming the estate was secure, that Vincent's men had been removed, that everyone was safe. When he finally ended the call, Helen turned to face him. "I should go," she said quietly. Francis's expression darkened. "What?" I've destroyed your Christmas, endangered your family, made you vulnerable to your enemies." Her voice cracked. "You risked everything for me, and I can't let you keep paying that price." She moved toward the guest room to gather her things, but Francis caught her wrist, pulling her back. "Stop," he said firmly. "Look at me." She did, tears already forming. "You didn't destroy anything," Francis said, his voice softer now. "Helen, you gave me the first real Christmas I've ever had." "How can you say that? Your family." "My family has spent every Christmas dinner performing for each other, playing roles, maintaining appearances." He stepped closer, both hands now framing her face. "Every year I sat at that table surrounded by people and felt completely alone. And then you walked into my gallery, arguing with Marcus about the symbolism in a Caravaggio painting." A tear slipped down Helen's cheek. Francis wiped it away with his thumb. "You saw me," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Not my name, not my reputation, not what I could do for you. You just saw me, a man who wanted to talk about art and ideas and truth. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "Francis, I love you." The words came out like a confession, like something he'd been holding back for too long. "I don't know when it started. Maybe that first day when you told me I was wrong about Baroque religious imagery. Maybe last night when you refused to hide. But I love you, Helen Knudsen, and I'm not letting you walk away." Helen's breath shattered. "I've been yours," she whispered, "since you asked me about my favorite painting and actually listened to the answer. Really listened, like what I thought mattered." He pulled her into his arms, and Helen collapsed against him. 18 months of fear and loneliness finally breaking open. He held her while she cried, his hand stroking her hair, his lips pressing against her temple. "I can't give you a normal life," Francis murmured. "My world is dangerous, complicated. There will always be threats, always be enemies." Helen pulled back enough to look at him. "I don't want normal. Normal hasn't protected me. Normal left me running and alone." She touched his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I want real, and this, you, are the most real thing I've ever had." He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of everything they'd both been too afraid to say. Christmas morning light streamed through the windows, bathing them in gold, as Francis held her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Because she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Francis rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me. Not just today. Always." "Always," Helen promised. 2 hours later, Francis's family arrived for Christmas morning breakfast, a Haley tradition that couldn't be broken even after the chaos of the night before. Catherine entered first, her elegant composure slightly shaken, followed by Thomas, who looked exhausted but relieved. Helen stood beside Francis in the living room, wearing borrowed clothes, her hand firmly clasped in his. "Everyone," Francis said, his voice carrying the authority they all recognized. "I want to formally introduce Helen Knudsen, not as my date, not as someone temporary." He looked at Helen, and something in his expression made even Catherine's breath catch. "She's the woman who reminds me why I'm human, and she's staying." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Catherine stepped forward. She studied Helen for a long moment, not with the coldness from the dinner, but with something softer, understanding perhaps, or recognition of something genuine in the way her son looked at this woman. "Welcome to the family, Helen," Catherine said finally, extending her hand. Helen took it, tears threatening again. "Thank you, Mrs. Haley." "Catherine," Francis's mother corrected gently, "we don't stand on formality with family." Thomas nodded his approval, and even Marcus, standing by the door, allowed himself a small smile. As the family settled in for breakfast, Helen found herself at the table surrounded by Haleys, no longer an outsider, no longer a witness in hiding, no longer just the curator who organized paintings in a back room. She was Helen Knudsen, the woman who'd stolen the heart of Francis Haley and survived everything that came after. Francis squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw her entire future in his eyes. Not perfect, not safe from every danger, but real and chosen and absolutely hers. She was his Christmas miracle, the gift she never knew she needed. And he was her forever home, the place where running finally stopped and living began. Outside, snow continued to fall over the city, covering old wounds with something clean and new, while inside, two people who'd found each other in the darkness finally stepped into the light, together. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Helen's fear and Francis's fierce protection, if you believe love is worth fighting for, drop a comment below telling me which moment hit you hardest. Was it when Francis first chose her, when he declared war for her, or when he finally said, "I love you" on Christmas morning? And if you enjoyed this journey from terror to love, from hiding to belonging, then you need to subscribe right now, because I create stories like this every week. Stories about people who fight for each other, who choose love over fear, who prove that the most powerful protection isn't money or weapons, it's genuine human connection. Hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it, because the next story might be even better than this one, and you don't want to miss it. Merry Christmas, and thank you for experiencing Helen and Francis's story with me. Now go tell someone you love them. Life's too short to hide what matters most.